The full afternoon sun beat down on the packed park, golden rays bouncing off the pavement, casting sharp shadows under the trees. Families walked by, children giggled, and vendors shouted to passers-by. As the chaos unfolded, Sergeant Daniel Hayes felt stuck, his heart thrumming like a drum in his chest. His gaze was fixed on something, or rather, someone, he'd never expected to see again. At the side of the crowded thoroughfare, an old man sat on a shredded bench, gripping a homemade leash attached to a scrawny, ragged dog that was resting at his feet. The dog's coat was matted, ribs visible even from a distance, but there was no mistaking those amber eyes that had once burned with loyalty and courage. Daniel's breath hitched. He stepped forward, then forward again, until he could see the pale scar running down the dog's flank. A scar earned long ago under circumstances only Daniel knew. "Rocky," he said, just loud enough for the hum of the crowd not to drown him out. The dog's ears twitched. Slowly, agonizingly, he lifted his head, his eyes connecting with Daniel's. Time stood still for an instant. Then Rocky gave a feeble whine, his tail thudding softly against the ground. The dog skidded across the ground, and Daniel fell to his knees, his polished boots grinding into the dirt as he leaned down to grab the K-9. But before he could get a hold of him, the old man moved in front of Rocky, his expression turning steely. "What do you want with him?" the man asked, tightening his grip on the leash. His tone was defensive, even protective, but he was not quite able to suppress a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. I know him," said Daniel, his voice breaking with the emotion. "He's mine." The old man shook his head decisively. "No, he's not. He's been with me for months. All I can do is take care of him when no one else will." Daniel balled his fists, his frustration and desperation warring inside him. "You don't understand. His voice trailed off, buoyed by memories that came rushing to him. Gunfire, blood-slicked fields, a brotherhood born of steel and flame. He swallowed hard and told himself to remain calm. "Please, just hear me out. You deserve to know what he really is, and why I can't ever let him go again." The old man hesitated a long moment, loosening his grip slightly on the leash. "At long last," he sighed, shoulders slumped as if bearing the world's weight. "Fine," he said, moving aside. "Tell me your story." "But if you are lying," Daniel nodded, his jaw set as he knelt next to Rocky, stroking the dog's fur gingerly. What he didn't yet know was that this would not merely be a matter of winning back a lost partner. It was to get to the bottom of why Rocky had been abandoned. And as the components began to unravel, they knew one thing for sure: justice was served. But first, he needed to run the dog who'd once given everything, for him, into his arms. Before we get started, where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below. Animal Story Unleashed. If you had told me that I would be creating a podcast, I never would have believed you. And we're excited to be on the road to 10K subscribers with your help. So make sure to like, share, subscribe, and join us on this journey. Now, on to the story. The park thrummed with life around them, but for Daniel, the world had reduced to just two things. Rocky and the old man wedged between them. His hands shook as, kneeling beside the dog, he brushed dirt and grime from Rocky's matted coat. Every caress seemed to be an act of infidelity. How had he let it get like this? How could anyone abandon such a loyal friend to such suffering? Rocky let out a small whine, his tail hitting the ground with little force. It was a ghost of the overzealous wag Daniel recalled, but it was more than enough to overcome whatever self-control he'd been maintaining. His eyes filled with tears as he whispered, "I'm so sorry, boy. I should have been here." The old man squirmed under the blanket, his chiseled face etched with guilt and doubt. He folded his arms across himself like a protective shield against the depths of Daniel's pain. "Look," he said gruffly, not looking me in the eye. "I don't know who you are or what you think you're doing, but this dog is mine now. I've fed him. I've kept him safe. He's all I have." Daniel glanced up sharply, his voice even though a storm boiled inside him. "Not that stray you picked up off the street. His name is Rocky, and he served this country by my side for years. You don't know what he means, not just to me, but to everyone who owes their lives to him. The old man winced, his hold on the leash tightening again. Served? What are you talking about? He's just a dog. Absolutely not, Daniel said, his tone so harsh the old man flinched. He's more than that. He's a hero. And somebody discarded him like garbage. Neither of them spoke for a moment. One could feel the tension in the air, reminded of the footsteps and laughter of children at play and the rustling leaves overhead. Noun, in her language, they would be equivalent to what they called spells. But Daniel had learned there was no direct translation. Spell, or probably here magic word, especially considering the level of its concept that the old man was using it, were not accurate. Fine, he mumbled grudgingly. Tell me your story, but if you're lying... Daniel drew a deep breath, steadying himself before he started. It was 6 years ago, he began, low in voice but full of emotion. We were deployed overseas, part of a special operations unit, you know, part of the unit that worked on high-risk missions. Rocky wasn't just my partner. He was my lifeline. We trained together, fought together, and survived together. Some nights I couldn't sleep because I knew we might not make it to the morning. But every time some fear snuck in, Rocky was there, covering my back. He paused, running a hand through his hair, memories rushing back. There was one mission. It changed everything. We had been deployed into enemy territory to seek insurgents hiding out in a vacant village. They were armed and dangerous, intelligence said, but no one predicted how bad it would become. Daniel's eyes fell upon Rocky, lying still beside him, his breath slow and steady. We were ambushed. They appeared out of nowhere. Gunfire, explosions. I didn't even know I'd been shot until Rocky pulled me behind cover. Without him, I wouldn't be here today. He saved my life and countless others, but he paid the price. The scar on his side, Daniel indicated the faint line along Rocky's flank. That's from shrapnel. He wouldn't leave my side, even as medics begged him to let go. The old man listened in silence, the line of his mouth shifting to a smile as Daniel spoke. When Daniel was finally quiet, the man exhaled slowly and rubbed a hand over his face. Why did they take him away from you? He asked quietly. Daniel clenched his jaw, his eyes sparking with anger. Budget cuts! Little said he was too old, too wounded to continue battling. They sent him somewhere else. I never learned where. I pleaded with them to allow me to adopt him, but was told that he would be well looked after. It turned out that taking care meant being dumped somewhere when he was no longer useful. James stared at Rocky, guilt written all over the old man's face. I found him wandering the streets months ago, he confessed, in a tone so low it was almost a whisper. He was starving, limping. I couldn't just leave him. So I took him home and gave him scraps and patched him up as best as I could. I thought I was helping him. You did, Daniel replied, locking eyes with the man. But he shouldn't be out on the street, or with someone who was unaware of his backstory. He belongs with me, with us. The old man paused, conflicted between his bond with Rocky and the realization that this dog deserved better than he could give. Finally, after what seemed like forever, he nodded slowly. All right, he said, emotion clogging his voice. Take him, but promise me one thing. You'll give him the life he deserves. Daniel stood, offering a hand to the man. I promise, thank you, for allowing him to survive, to live long enough for me to discover him. Tears streamed down the old man's face as he relinquished the leash. He touched Rocky's head one last time, gently, and then stepped back, leaving Daniel alone with his once faithful companion. Down on one knee next to Rocky, Daniel pressed his forehead against the dog's, his tears running freely. I'm here now, buddy, he said softly, and I'm never letting you go again. The following days for Daniel were ambiguous with emotions. Returning home to Rocky felt like ending a chapter he thought forever sealed, but it also marked the beginning of more heart-emerging tribulations. 6 months had passed, but Rocky felt like a different dog. Years of deprivation and hardship had taken their toll, both physically and emotionally. The once mighty German shepherd, who had once stood shotgun in the face of calamity, now quailed at rough gestures and curled into himself when things got too much. Daniel created a cozy nook in his small apartment and put down a soft bed, fresh water, and bowls of healthy food. Rocky barely touched the food at first, his appetite dulled by years of scavenging scraps. His coat was dingy and matted, his muscles atrophied with malnutrition. Even basic actions like climbing onto the bed appeared to tire him. But despite his frailty, Rocky's eyes still contained a glimmer of recognition, a spark that told Daniel their bond hadn't been entirely erased. Every morning, Daniel spent hours grooming Rocky, painstakingly untying knots in his fur and examining the scars that overlapped across his body. All scars, all had stories to tell, reminders of the sacrifices Rocky had made. Daniel chatted softly as he worked, telling her old stories from their time together, the missions, the victories, the quiet moments between battles. Rocky felt far away at first, as if he was staring at the floor, uncertain whether to believe the man who said he was his partner. But bit by bit, he started to respond. A tentative wag of his tail here, a nuzzle against Daniel's hand there. It was progress, however small. It was on one evening, when the sun had set into the horizon, trailing its warm colours behind on the glass panes, that Daniel felt it was time to take out Rocky. He attached a strong leash to Rocky's collar and walked him slowly down the steps and into the local park, which was lacking in action. The open space visibly made Rocky nervous at first. His ears back, he hesitated, his paws bluish-grey on the ground. Daniel went down on one knee beside him, speaking softly. "It's okay, boy. You're safe. We'll go slow." They walked up along the isolated trail step by step, Daniel maintaining a brisk stride as he let Rocky determine the pace. Then Rocky's stiffness gave way, and his steps became more assured. And when Daniel paused by a patch of grass and crouched down, enticing Rocky to investigate, the dog finally trotted off, nose in quizzical contact with the ground. For the first time since reuniting, Rocky wagged his tail with real excitement. Watching him, Daniel found a lump in his throat. This was the Rocky he knew, the brave, curious spirit who always moved forward, regardless of the odds. But he was aware the path forward wouldn't be smooth. The road to rebuilding trust required more than walks and words. It took patience, consistency, and a boatload of evidence that Daniel would never desert him again. That night, as Rocky nestled into his bed, Daniel sat next to him, swiping and scrolling through old photos on his phone. There were photos of Rocky in all his glory, soberly poised by his side during training drills, leaping over obstacles, and now lounging lazily in the barracks. One photo stood out, a candid of Rocky mid-bark, teeth bared in faux ferocity, Daniel's laughter floating directly behind it. It was a moment of pure joy, a taste of the life they'd known together when everything was still in one piece. But in the interlude between the happy memories were darker ones I must have repressed. Images of shattered, war-torn landscapes, blood-soaked bandages, and the haunted faces of friends dead. Daniel lingered on one photo in particular, Rocky lying in a small tent that had been set up for medical attention. His side bound with gauze, his eyes half closed but alert. That mission, the one that had cost them both dearly, was the one where Rocky had saved Daniel's life. And now, as he looked at the frail dog sleeping just feet from him, Daniel couldn't help but think how much of what Rocky was suffering from could have been avoided if someone had been willing to fight for him. The following day, Daniel took Rocky to the local veterinarian for proper care. The vet confirmed Daniel's worst fears. Rocky's problems were far deeper than neglect. Years of poor nutrition had compromised the strength of his bones, and untreated injuries had resulted in permanent damage. The vet put Sonia on medication and ordered physical therapy, cautioning Daniel that it would take time for her to recover. When they got back to the clinic, Daniel noticed something strange wedged in the dog's frayed collar, a mangy tag with odd contact information crudely etched on. Intrigued, he wrote it down, vowing to find out more later. Whatever secrets lay behind that tag, Daniel knew they might provide the answer to how Rocky came to be abandoned in the first place and who was responsible. At home, Daniel worked to restore Rocky's strength and spirit. They practiced simple commands. They played fetch with a weathered tennis ball and even retraced some of the training routines they had followed during active duty. As days went by, Rocky became stronger, and slowly but surely his playful side returned. But Daniel could not shake the sense that something, or someone, was missing from the equation. And whoever had betrayed Rocky deserved answers, Daniel swore, and he would find them. What he did not know until later is that the path in front of him not only would make him face the system that allowed Rocky's plight to go unchallenged, but also challenge his own guilt for standing by while it all happened. With Rocky on the mend, Daniel's resolve to discover the truth behind his abandonment only deepened. He could remember the crumpled, tattered tag he'd discovered hidden beneath Rocky's collar, and which refused to leave his thoughts. One night, after tucking Rocky into his bed, Daniel sat down at the kitchen table and stared at a grab bag of scribbled numbers and an address scrawled on a wrinkled piece of paper. His hands balled into fists, rage roiling just under the skin. Someone had sold out Rocky, someone with a debt to mount. The following morning, Danny called the number listed on the tag. After several rings, a brusque voice responded. "K-9 relocation services," the man said, his voice terse and remote. "Hi," Daniel said, starting to falter slightly. "I'm trying to track down a dog named Rocky. His name is Hannibal, and he is a retired military K-9 German Shepherd. You might have represented the guy in his case." There was silence on the other end. "Hold, please," the man said, and there was a noise of papers being shuffled. After a beat, he continued. "Yeah, we took in a dog that fits the description a couple of years ago. We sold to a private contractor. Why do you ask?" Daniel's jaw tightened. Who was the contractor? And why was he not placed in a proper home? "Placement details aren't something we deal with," the man said defensively. "Our responsibility is to rehome retired K-9s depending on their health and usefulness. If he was unfit for service, then it's not our problem." Daniel's blood boiled, but he willed himself to remain calm. "Can you share the name of the contractor? Please, I must know what has happened to him." Another long pause. Then the man grudgingly divulged the name of the company, Vanguard Security Solutions, and an address hours away from the city. The line went dead before Daniel could press him further. To get some answers, Daniel found a friend he could trust to watch over Rocky while he made the trip. It killed him to leave Rocky behind, even for a single second, but Daniel knew he had to make his way past the people who left his partner behind before he could move on. On the drive to the address, his mind filled with questions. What kind of operation would abandon a war dog, a decorated veteran like Rocky? And how many more had come to a similar end? When he got there, the sight of the facility gave him chills. It was a sprawling compound enclosed by high fences topped with barbed wire, its gates watched over by men in tactical gear. Vanguard Security Solutions, read the sign out front in all caps, blocky printed letters. Daniel went forward, flashing his military ID when confronted by the guards. "I'm here to ask about a former K-9 you took care of," he said, his tone professional, although a storm was brewing inside him. Once we'd convinced him there was no other way, we led him into the main office, where a sharply dressed woman with a cold sardine smile welcomed him. "How can we assist you, Sergeant Hayes?" she replied, her voice smooth but frigid. "I'm interested in a dog that was transferred to your custody, a German Shepherd named Rocky," he said, leaning in a little. "He did several tours abroad and saved thousands of lives, including my own. But somehow, he wound up the lost, starving child of the streets. Care to explain how you got away with that?" The woman's smile wavered for a moment and then returned. "Ah, yes, Rocky. Unfortunately, he was deemed too old injured to continue service and unsuitable for adoption through our program. We tried to place him with the appropriate handlers, but there just weren't any at the time." "Bullshit!" Daniel shouted, slamming his fist on the desk. "You dumped him! Don't insult me by pretending this was anything but negligence." Her expression hardened. "Our organization exists under a tight set of rules. If a dog can no longer perform, we adjust accordingly." And arrangements mean letting them rot? Daniel snapped back, his voice rising. These creatures sacrificed so much for us. They are worth more than being thrown away like garbage. Before things could go further, another staff member entered the room mid-sneak, whispering in the woman's ear. Her mood changed instantly, and she stood and smoothed her blazer. Sergeant Hayes, I think we're finished here. If you'll excuse me, I have things to tend to. Rejected but not deterred, Daniel stormed out of the facility filled with rage. His mind churned on the drive home. Vanguard didn't fail through mere negligence. They participated in a system that abused working dogs until they were no longer useful, only to discard them like a broken tool without a second thought. But Daniel was not going to let them get away with it. Back home, Daniel reviewed documents and records involving K-9 retirements and found some disturbing trends. Dogs like Rocky by the millions had been passed off to private contractors and disappeared from official records soon after. Many found themselves in shelters, on the streets or worse. The belated realization hit Daniel like a gut punch. Rocky's story was not unique, it was systemic. Propelled by guilt and determination, Daniel decided to act. After that point, with Rocky once again back to normal physically and mentally, Daniel started a page documenting their progress, posting photos and videos online to show others the struggles of retired K9s ending up in shelters. He contacted fellow veterans as well as animal advocates and journalists, determined to have the truth come out and hold organizations like Vanguard responsible. One night, while Daniel scrolled through an inbox full of support messages, Rocky padded over and laid his head on Daniel's knee. Suddenly, Daniel did not feel like just a soldier. He felt like a man with a mission, like someone with a purpose. But Daniel also knew the battle was not over yet. It wouldn't be easy to expose corruption, and powerful entities like Vanguard wouldn't go quietly. Yet, as he gazed down at Rocky, whose amber eyes radiated with new life, Daniel said he would persevere. This wasn't just about justice served for Rocky. It was about honoring every dog who had served and sacrificed beside their human partners in duty. The days in the aftermath of Daniel's confrontation with Vanguard were tense but productive. Equipped with evidence and sworn statements from other veterans who had experienced the same betrayal he did, he started piecing together a case against the company. But as he fought for the truth, his mind was drawn only to one mission, the one that had sealed the bond that could never be broken between himself and Rocky. It was more than a memory. It was a hurt that still smarted, years later. One evening, when Rocky was curled beside him on the floor, Daniel stared down at the scar on the dog's flank, the same scar he had pointed out to the old man the first time he'd met him. His fingers traced the jagged line absently, and without knowing it, he started speaking out loud, his voice low and laden with feeling. "You remember this, don't you, boy?" Daniel murmured, his eyes zeroed in on the scar. "Afghanistan. That village. God, I'll never forget." Rocky raised his head a little higher, amber eyes on Daniel's face. For a moment, it seemed that the dog understood, that he remembered too. Daniel took a deep breath, leaning back on the couch and allowing the memories to flow through him. Flashback. The mission that changed it all. The call came in the middle of the night. Intelligence reports showed that insurgents had established themselves in an abandoned village at the fringes of their territory, stockpiling weapons and mapping out planned attacks. The mission was clear: infiltrate, gather intel, and take out the target if required. But nothing could have prepared them for what was to come. Daniel and Rocky crept through the darkness, their movements in sync after years of training together. Rocky took point, sniffing for threats, while Daniel watched their six. Chapter 1. A Spore of Hope. The air felt heavy with possibility, every shadow a potential enemy. They made it to the center of the village without incident, but everything changed as they neared a crumbling compound. A blast shook the ground under them, hurling debris in every direction. Daniel dropped to the ground reflexively, covering his head as gunfire erupted around them. The ambush was vicious and unrelenting. Bullets zipped by, ricocheting off walls and sending up plumes of dust. Daniel began to panic as he realized they were surrounded. "Rocky!" he called out, searching the mayhem for his partner. Amidst the smoke and chaos, he saw Rocky on the ground nearby, lying still in the dust next to a mound of rubble. His heart stopped. "No, no, no!" With every remaining ounce of strength, Daniel crawled toward him, bullets clamoring around his ears. When he finally got to Rocky, he saw the blood seeping into the dog's fur, a piece of shrapnel lodged deep in his side. Rocky's eyes were wide open as he focused on Daniel, even despite being injured. "Stay with me, buddy!" Daniel screamed, his own tears spilling down his cheeks as he pressed down on the hole. "You're going to be okay. Just stay with me." Rocky squeaked softly, but surrendered as Daniel pulled him behind cover. Despite being injured, the dog would not leave Daniel's side, placing himself in between his handler and the gunfire. Rocky was able to help Dan take out a couple of insurgents that had flanked their position so they could hold out long enough for support to arrive. When the medics finally dragged Daniel away, Rocky struggled against them, trying to stay near. Only then did the dog relent, plummeting into unconsciousness after Daniel promised, "I'll come back for you." Daniel swore that night to never let anyone keep them apart again. And yet here they were, years later, brought back together under conditions neither deserved. Back to the present. Daniel went through the flashback, tears running down his cheeks, and ran a hand over his eyes. Rocky had laid his head in Daniel's lap beside him, perhaps to offer comfort. At that moment, Daniel understood something awesome. Rocky was not merely a throwback to the past. He was a symbol of strength, loyalty, and hope. But the guilt lingered. Daniel had let Rocky down once by failing to fight harder for him in retirement. He wasn't going to get that wrong again. Daniel, with renewed determination, turned his gaze back towards the papers in front of him. He knew if he exposed Vanguard, it wouldn't take back the years stolen from Rocky, but it would make sure no other K-9 was left with the same fate. Daniel was tireless over the next few weeks, working with journalists, advocacy groups, and fellow veterans to expose the systemic neglect of retired working dogs. Their campaign quickly picked up steam, creating outrage and demands for reform. Photos of Rocky, his scars, his recovery, his resolute spirit, became the face of the movement. Justice for K-9s. When the system failed K-9s, we refused to let it get away with it. Through it all, Rocky stayed by Daniel's side, a living symbol of the bond between humans and animals. His body showed all the scars of a life well lived, and his spirit was still unbroken. Daniel drew strength from seeing him thrive as he continued to fight against the odds. And then, one day, the breakthrough happened. One of the big news outlets ran an expose that featured leaked documents showing Vanguard's unsavory practices along with first-hand accounts from whistleblowers. Public pressure grew, leading government officials to investigate how retired K-9s were treated. For the first time in years, Daniel allowed himself to experience a flicker of hope. But as the dust was settling, Daniel knew the real one was only beginning. The justice owed to Rocky, and to all of the forgotten heroes like him, requires more than headlines. It would require action, policy changes, and a commitment to honouring the sacrifices these dogs made. Daniel glanced down at Rocky, standing strong enough to run and play just like he used to, and smiled faintly. "We are not finished yet, buddy," he whispered, "but we're getting there." And over the months that followed the expose, there was a whirlwind of change. The investigation led to a pattern of negligence and abuse of retired K-9s, and subsequently to widespread reform. New laws were passed requiring appropriate medical care, rehabilitation, and placement of working dogs once they are done with their service. Inspired by Daniel's campaign and Rocky's story, advocacy groups emerged around the country. The hashtag Justice for K-9s became a rallying cry, galvanizing veterans, animal lovers, and lawmakers on a shared mission to elevate the unsung heroes of military and law enforcement. For Daniel, a good job as a veteran is to simply recall the sacrifices that he made. His loyalty to his family, his love of the family, and how he was committed to the family all made him a good dog, and he was. But victory lay not in headlines or policy changes. It was in the needling moments he spent with Rocky. Every wag of the dog's tail, every playful bark seemed like an affirmation of resilience and second chances. Together, they had helped turn pain into purpose, graduating their private tragedy into a movement that would rescue untold lives. On a bright, crisp autumn morning, Daniel packed Rocky into the back seat of his truck and drove to a local park where a ceremonial event was taking place. So it was a dedication event, a new non-profit called Heroes with Paws, a group dedicated to helping support retired working dogs and work for them in homes. In the middle of the park was a bronze statue of a mid-stride German shepherd, head up, eyes looking ahead. Below it was an inscription, "To the loyal companions who served without question, protected without hesitation, and loved without limits. You will never be forgotten." Daniel walked to the podium, and the crowd quieted down. Veterans in uniforms stood arm in arm with families who had adopted retired K-9s as children laughed, while dogs of all sizes and breeds bounded across the grassy field. The position that my grandfather sat proudly at Daniel's side, where his shiny coat could perhaps shine the brightest and where his very being would command attention from all those present. Daniel coughed lightly, casting his gaze across the multitudes as he held onto the borders of the podium. When I rescued Rocky, he started, his voice quietly powerful. And still, I didn't just rescue my old partner. I rescued a reminder of what we owe these unbelievable animals. They don't ask for awards or accolades. All they want to do is serve, protect, and love. And when their work is complete, they are entitled to the same loyalty they provided us. He paused, looking down at Rocky, who looked up at him with perfect faith. Rocky did something interesting for me. It's not just a story about courage, it's a story about forgiveness. He forgave me for letting him down, and so I've been able to forgive myself. That's the power of this commonality between ourselves. It mends wounds you forgot you had. The audience broke into applause, but Daniel held up a hand to silence them. This isn't just about Rocky or me. It's a tale of every dog that has ever put on a badge, carried a pack, or stood guard in the darkest of hours. These dogs aren't tools, they're family, and it's our duty to see that they are cared for, not forsaken. As he finished at the podium, an audience rushed toward him and his movement partner, hungry to learn from the leaders of such a massive transformation. Kids crouched down to pet Rocky, their laughter intertwined with the yips of other dogs. Daniel was hugged by veterans who said they were grateful to him for giving a voice to those who could not speak for themselves. Daniel, for the first time in years, felt whole, not by the work he had done, but by the community they had created together. That evening, as the sun sank below the horizon, Daniel and Rocky strolled on a largely empty trail on the outskirts of town. The air was cool, and it smelled of fallen leaves and dirt. Rocky leapt ahead with seemingly limitless energy, while Daniel walked behind, enjoying the tranquility of the moment. "You were great, buddy," Daniel said softly, enough to catch up to scratch Rocky behind the ears. "We did good." Rocky turned around and gave him a look that said he knew, his tail wagging like crazy, and Daniel chuckled. All they had been through, the fights, the betrayals, the journey back to health, had made them stronger than ever. Their bond could never be broken, brewed in fire and cooled in love. Daniel stopped at the top of the hill. The town spread out behind him. They saw lights glittering in the distance, lives changed by their journey. Somewhere out there, other dogs like Rocky were discovering new homes and new beginnings. And a little closer, Rocky stood next to him, a living testament that no good deed goes unrecognized. Daniel crouched down and drew Rocky close. "You're my hero, boy," he whispered. "You always were, and always will be." Rocky gave his face an affectionate lick, and Daniel snickered, brushing away the slobber with a smile. As they walked home beneath a blanket of stars, one thing was clear. Their story wasn't only about redemption, it was about legacy. A legacy built on loyalty, compassion, and the unwavering conviction that even in the worst of times, love will always find the way. Heroes don't always expect accolades, and they just put it all on the line. This story is a reminder to honor those who serve, to fight for those who can't fight for themselves, and to treasure the bonds that heal us when we need it most. Because sometimes the greatest, bravest acts are not the ones fought on battlefields, but in the choices we make to protect, nurture, and love.